Hello everybody, it's lovely to see you. I'd like to add my welcome to you all. It's lovely to see some familiar faces and new ones as well that I might have emailed. So I'm going to just outline why we're doing this and why now. So some of you might know some of this, some of you might not. But Engage is a growing national network of organisations who are linking to make Christian marriage possible. Not compulsory, but possible. So I'm just trying to aim this somewhere. There we go. So we'll see throughout today, Christians might want to marry another Christian, but how often can that aspiration be a reality? There are some key principles underlying our work. Firstly, the Great Commission in Matthew 28. So Engage is about reaching and discipling people, and relationships, marriage and family, they're all key discipleship issues for everybody. And then biblically, singleness is good and marriage is good. And then today, we're talking about Christian marriage as being marriage between a Christian man and a Christian woman and all that that can mean. And we're delighted that Nikki's going to speak to us about that later. So in terms of the aspiration of Christian marriage, well, obviously, some people become Christians after they get married. But we know from biblical teaching in Corinthians and recent research on mixed marriages by the Evangelical Alliance, say in 2012, that it's best for a Christian to marry another Christian. And in the biggest survey of its kind, Christian Connection research showed that most single Christians want to marry another Christian. And for those who are married, well, surely all Christians would want their spouse to know the Lord as well. But in reality, there are three key barriers. So, several large studies now show that there's about a 1 man to 2 women ratio in the church, and this has massive implications for all of us. Christian men and women don't currently have an equal opportunity to get married and have children. And secondly, there's a lack of teaching. So there's a lack of teaching about social trends, about restoring the gender imbalance, about relationships. So if you noticed, you very rarely get teaching on singleness. You sometimes get teaching on marriage, and you virtually never get teaching on how to get from A to B in a godly way or godly dating. Okay? Other than the Old Testament, just be content and wait on God. But things are changing now, so more about that later. And the third thing is there's a lack of awareness about the gender imbalance and also the impact that it has, and therefore a lack of teaching as well. You might have heard the letter to Christianity magazine in 27, which said, "Our understanding is that the enemy will seek to destroy Christian marriages, yet we don't seem able to make the tiny logical leap required to realise that it's an even better strategy for him to prevent these marriages from happening in the first place. And no godly children to worry about either," it said. And even for those who are aware, well, Christian leaders have sometimes said things to me like, well, I know it's an issue, but what can you do? Or, I don't think it's an issue in our church, and they haven't counted the ratio. Or, well, we did try a few things, but it didn't work. So I think sometimes church leaders are married men. The situation doesn't sort of affect them as much, perhaps so personally, which might impact on their motivation to change sometimes. But things are changing. I've also had Christian leaders say to me things like, well, I'm married, but this situation really affects my daughters. So our church is changing things. So for singleness, there are lots of sort of implications. If people have chosen to be single, then obviously the church must support them effectively and sensitively. Evangelical Alliance research in 2012 found 61% of adult Christians under 35 were single. And the church gender imbalance and wider social influences mean that there are more single Christians now, but often the church just reframes the resulting massive epidemic of singleness as a God-given gift, whether people want it or not, and ignores the context that we're all living in. So we need to address that in any teaching about singleness. Now, the psychosocial dynamics is another thing. I once made a list of all the psychosocial dynamics I'd observed between single Christian men and women. And then the Christian Connection research identified an almost identical list. David's smiling there. So the gender imbalance has actually caused a power imbalance in men's favour. So in summary, the research found that most people reported competition between women for men, leading to unhealthy relationships and making men passive and picky. And other findings, well, you might see these things all the time, or you might have no idea that they're going on, but they're there. So other findings were there's a traditional role reversal. So women pursue and compete for men, sometimes losing friends in the process. It's hard for people to make friends without everyone thinking this is initiating a relationship. And men back off for fear of being pounced on, men and women reported. And there are some indecisive men who enjoy lots of attention and they play the large field without always sufficiently valuing Christian women. I genuinely know men who explicitly talk about the sweetie shop syndrome. There's so much choice, they can't choose. And men wonder why they can't find someone. They wonder if there's something wrong with them, or they say that finding compatible women is difficult. Christian men often want women who are 5, 10, or 20 years younger themselves with whom to have children. And also, women and men sometimes ignore unwanted suggestions of a date or emails, and that can lead to hurt and confusion rather than kind, honest clarity. So this is the current context around dating and relationships for Christians. But things have changed over time as well. So, say 2 generations ago, there were about the same number of men and women in the church, and then people met socially and started going out in sort of exclusive relationships. And the expectation was that pretty much everybody gets married. And then 1 generation ago, in general society, there was more singleness and marriage breakdown. There were about 50% more women than men in church, but people still met socially and started going out, and some churches were good at trying to really include single people. There were more of them. But more recently, there are about twice as many women as men in the church, and there are less opportunities for people to meet socially, more people meet online. There's a more defined stage of dating where people get to know a range of people more casually before deciding if they might start going out with one person, before deciding if they might get engaged or marry perhaps. Well, to counteract secular dating attitudes that damaged and devalued people, there was a very young American church pastor called Joshua Harris. He taught Christians to stop dating and just to get to know one person well with a view to seeing if they might get married. And his books hugely influenced the US and the UK dating scene, but actually contributed perhaps to a more high-stakes, pressurised dating culture, so people haven't dated so much. So to counteract this, Henry Cloud, who's an American psychologist, he's well known for writing the Boundaries materials you might have heard of. He wrote a book called How to Get a Date Worth Keeping. And his stated aim was to teach Christians to date more widely in a godly and honouring way, to depressurise dating without devaluing it and people, and also to encourage people to learn more about themselves and about other people in the process. So people can look out for that and other helpful books on our website as well. So the dating culture in the UK, it's not that healthy. It's hardly happening. So in the Christian Connection research, even 54% of people using the dating website said that they hadn't dated for at least a year, or it was many years since they last went on a date. And the number one factor to change, to make Christian dating and marriage possible, is the gender imbalance. Teaching about dating and relationships needs that healthy context in order to have any impact, or enough impact. So Nikki and Silla Lee have helpfully used the analogy of a funnel. So sort of healthy dating a range of people before going out with one, rather than just searching for the one. Yeah. And I think key messages need to be, a coffee isn't a marriage proposal. Just ask people on a date and just say yes unless you've got very good reason not to. And they're an axe murderer or something, really pretty good reasons. The consequences for women of all of this, that's our sisters, daughters, nieces, goddaughters, friends. Half of all Christian women say that they have to choose between staying single and childless or marrying a man who's not yet a Christian. Well, that's a third of the church. So last month I met up with a gorgeous friend of mine. It's Emily, who's 22. I've changed her name. And she and her brother Dan, who's 20. I've known them since they were little. They're both really gorgeous, godly, intelligent, good-looking, outgoing sort of people. And they grew up abroad, actually, with lots of male and female friends. And coming back to the UK has been quite a surprise for them. Emily said there are virtually no single men in her church. And I said, well, actually, that's quite normal because of the national gender imbalance. And I hadn't even explained about Engage. And she said, but that means that half of all Christian women have to choose between marrying a non-Christian and staying single and childless for the rest of your life. Well, that's no choice at all, she said. And she said that at Dan's university church, he finds all the girls are obsessed by marriage and is almost putting him off going. So, forced singleness is ignored, and there is huge hidden spiritual damage being caused by the church. One woman told me last week, people think we're all amazing because we have good jobs and we travel, but we're crying every night. One stunning lady trainee vicar told me, it's excruciating and nobody talks about it. Many people and women have to reconcile their suffering resulting from faithful sacrifice with a God who loves them. And then the agonies of unwanted childlessness are rarely recognised and supported in the church for couples, let alone single people. They have to grieve losing their hopes and family and peer group, even without a partner. A woman in her early 40s said, imagine you knew in 2 years' time that your children were going to die and there's nothing more you can do about it. And then the church could prevent the situation, but isn't taking action. How would you feel? And for women who are married to men who are not yet Christians, there's often no recognition and support, and sometimes just judgment from the church. So did you see the film Suffragette at all? Came out a while ago. It's about the women who weren't able to vote because they were women. And today that seems like a massive injustice. But in today's church, women aren't able to get married and have children because they're women. And is that not a massive injustice? And then for men as well, consequences for men. The church gives them far less opportunity to be introduced to Jesus and to grow in faith. And actually, is that a bigger injustice? And we're called to bring about justice for everybody. There's a massive need for more effective evangelism and discipleship amongst men. And Nathan will say more later about how this can work really well, because thankfully it can. And how often do Christian men intentionally disciple other men around relationships with women? Last year, a guy in his early 40s genuinely asked me, he said, there are so many lovely women in church. How do I decide who to get to know first? And some guys lack confidence, and they're anxious about being proactive and failing. But wouldn't widespread intentional mentoring and encouragement from Christian male role models across the UK, wouldn't that be fantastic? So consequences for children and young people. Well, I work as a full-time psychologist with children and young people. So I'm thinking, well, what is the church doing about spiritual fatherlessness for children and young people due to the lack of Christian men around? They need support and role models too. And what if parents divorce? How do we support the children and restore their view of healthy Christian marriage for their future? We've got to help them understand something of the potential of Christian marriage even before they're adults. Well, in mixed marriages, women are often, more often the Christian partner, where there's a Christian married to a non-Christian, which isn't a surprise. But this often presents difficult issues. Evangelical Alliance research found that over 90% of Christian couples expressed happiness with their marriage, while only 66% of those in mixed marriages did so. And the consequence for children and young people in the future. So unless things change in today's church, only 11% of its grandchildren will have 2 Christian parents. And the details are on our website. So, These are all issues across a massive range of churches, and how can we change things? Well, the Engage Network vision is to make singleness or marriage a genuine choice for all Christian women and men, through a church which is gender balanced and teaches about healthy Christian singleness, dating and marriage. We have 3 key aims: to facilitate action amongst Christians that raises awareness of it all, to connect men to Jesus and the church to men, creating a gender balanced church, and to promote teaching. So to support our vision and aims, we've set up a comprehensive resource website, we've held events like this, we've facilitated joint work between organisations or national research, development projects, speakers speaking at different national conferences. Well, historically, different ministries in the church have been doing fantastic work, but often working in silos. So this is how we're sort of hoping to sort of change things. There's a diagram which I think is in your pack, but it's got the outside. We've got society's approach to relationships, and then all the other contexts in the middle. That's another slide, actually. Thanks. You can see that all these contexts affect each other. So the Engage Steering Group has somebody from each of those fields, and we're hearing today from speakers across all of those fields. But things are changing. It's amazing to see the Lord joining the dots between everything that people is doing and to work to churn the tide so that Christian marriage is possible. So just lastly, looking ahead for this and future generations, some ideas about making the reality. National leaders would include these issues in their strategic plans. Those in theological education would all be aware of the issues and solutions. National holiday conferences would make these issues main stage, metaphorically and literally, as well as optional seminars. All church leaders would regularly monitor their congregations and what's going on and provide teaching. People in counselling and pastoral care would all be trained on the issues so that they understand and can support them, even if it's not been their experience. And national marriage, organisations and local ones would really support Christians married to non-Christians. So our website signposts are all the resources that can make this possible. This is just an outline. This is all about growing a healthy kingdom of justice and relational strength. So we've all got our part to play. So let's pray about what is our part.